Who do you think you are, coming here and claiming what isn't yours?" The words cut through the grand hall like a knife. Naomi froze for a moment, hearing the sharp edge of disbelief in her cousin Victoria's voice. The room felt heavier than the marble beneath her feet. Guests, relatives, and staff alike had turned their heads, whispering behind polite smiles and half-hidden frowns. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the folder containing the documents that proved her right to the inheritance. She had prepared for questions, for doubts, even for hostility, but the sheer venom in Victoria's accusation had taken her breath away. "These papers, they mean nothing. You've forged them. You have no claim here." Victoria's voice rose, echoing off the high ceilings, a mixture of anger and disbelief. Naomi opened her mouth to respond, but the words refused to form, trapped by a wave of tension that filled the hall. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, some curious, some skeptical, some quietly judging. And in that instant, she realized just how alone she appeared in a room so full of people. And yet, she also felt the quiet strength that had carried her this far, the knowledge that she was legally entitled to what was hers, that truth was on her side. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to ask you, our viewers, where are you watching from today? Which city, which country holds you as you listen to this story unfold? If you're enjoying the story so far, consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like so you won't miss the rest of Naomi's journey. Because what happens next will test her patience, courage, and sense of justice in ways she could never have imagined. Naomi took a deep breath and spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I am here because these documents show my right. This inheritance belongs to me, legally and fairly, and I have come to claim it." The words hung in the air, steady as a heartbeat, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Victoria's eyes narrowed, scanning every detail, searching for a flaw, anything to discredit Naomi before the family gathered to witness her claim. "Legally?" Victoria scoffed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do you really think law matters more than blood? More than what our family has built for generations? You're nothing like us. You don't belong here." A ripple of murmurs passed through the onlookers, some nodding in uneasy agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Naomi felt the weight of their attention, the judgment that came without words, the silent assumption that her presence was an intrusion, a mistake. And yet, she refused to look away. She refused to shrink beneath the scrutiny that sought to diminish her. The documents in her hand were proof, yes, but even more than that, they were a symbol of every quiet moment she had spent preparing for this confrontation, every ounce of resilience she had cultivated in the face of doubt and dismissal. "I belong wherever the law says I do," Naomi replied, her voice steady, "and I am not leaving until my rights are recognized." The room fell into tense silence, the kind that stretches long enough for every heart to race and every thought to sharpen. Even Victoria seemed momentarily unsettled, though she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "You think confidence will convince us?" Victoria hissed. "You think courage alone will open these doors? I have spent my life here. I know this family. You will find no welcome, no friends, no allies." Naomi looked past the immediate threats, past the voices raised in opposition, and focused on the truth she carried. It was more powerful than fear, stronger than anger, and unyielding in its quiet presence. As Victoria continued to rail, Naomi allowed herself a moment to breathe, to center her thoughts. She reminded herself that the real battle was not in loud accusations or public displays, but in calm persistence, in letting facts and integrity speak louder than any voice raised in hostility. And still, the whispers and sidelong glances reminded her that this hall, this family, this moment, were not going to yield easily. The tension built as the relatives exchanged knowing looks, some supportive, some doubtful, some openly hostile. Naomi could feel the history of unspoken rules, the weight of expectations and assumptions that had shaped this family long before she arrived. And she understood, in that silent, pressing moment, that claiming her inheritance was never going to be simple. It was not merely a matter of law or documents, it was a matter of confronting prejudice, of standing firm against assumptions and judgments that had been laid down for decades. Yet even as the murmurs swirled and the tension thickened, Naomi's resolve did not falter. She allowed herself a small thought, that truth has a way of unfolding, that clarity and justice can shine through even the most crowded, skeptical room. She straightened her posture, lifted her gaze, and spoke again, softer this time, but just as firm. I am here, fully prepared, and I will wait until my right is recognized. The room shifted slightly. The staff adjusted, the family members muttered, but Naomi remained still, holding the calm that came from certainty. She thought briefly about the journey that had brought her here, years of preparation, the courage to claim what she knew was hers, the strength to confront disbelief and disdain. And in that quiet confidence, the story of Naomi's inheritance began to unfold in a way that no amount of anger or scorn could immediately stop. It was only the beginning, but already the hall was alive with the tension of confrontation, the possibility of revelation, and the unspoken promise that in time, the truth would demand to be heard. The tension in the room had not eased since Naomi had declared her claim, and the whispers of doubt and disbelief continued to swirl like a storm around her. Every glance from her relatives felt like a challenge, every murmur a question about her right to be there. Victoria did not relent. Her accusations grew sharper, her words more pointed, and her tone more venomous. "You think that paperwork changes anything," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury, "but this family does not recognize you. You are a stranger trying to step into a legacy that was never meant for you." The other relatives nodded subtly, eyes flicking to Naomi with the silent judgment of those who believed they knew better, who thought themselves the rightful arbiters of what is fair and who is worthy. Naomi listened, keeping her voice low but firm. "The law does not lie," she said, "and the truth will be seen. I am not here to take what is not mine, only what is rightfully mine." Victoria's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Rightful? You are naive. You have no understanding of what loyalty, blood, and history mean here. You think a few papers are enough to erase decades of legacy?" Naomi felt the weight of her words, and the cold judgment of those around her, but she did not flinch. She had come prepared, not only with documents, but with patience and clarity. She knew that haste, anger, or shouting would do nothing but weaken her position. Yet the family's attacks were relentless. They questioned her character, her upbringing, even her motives, suggesting that she had manipulated the system or deceived distant relatives to insert herself into the inheritance. Every accusation was a knife, aimed to provoke fear, shame, and self-doubt. Naomi allowed herself to acknowledge the fear, the small tremor of worry that tried to creep into her thoughts, and then she let it go, returning to the knowledge that she had earned her place through truth, diligence, and patience. The room shifted as a lawyer appointed by the family spoke, trying to validate Victoria's claims. "We must examine every detail," he said, flipping through his own set of documents, "because any mistake or irregularity could change everything." Naomi felt the tension tighten around her like an invisible grip, yet she remained calm, focusing on the facts she had meticulously gathered. She reminded herself that the evidence would speak louder than anger, louder than prejudice, louder than those who believed that wealth and power could override justice. Hours seemed to stretch as the scrutiny intensified. Naomi presented letters, notarized papers, and testimonies from those who had worked closely with the relative who had left her the inheritance. She answered every question with precision, clarity, and calm, letting the truth reveal itself step by step. The family, meanwhile, continued to cast doubt, whispering to each other, exchanging skeptical glances, attempting subtle manipulations, and appealing to old loyalties. Victoria's veiled threats became sharper, suggesting that Naomi had somehow bribed or deceived someone, questioning her motives at every turn. Naomi listened without responding emotionally, her patience a shield against the onslaught. She understood that the battle was not merely about legal documents or money. It was about perception, prejudice, and the deeply ingrained belief that she, a young black woman, was somehow unfit to inherit what was rightfully hers. In that room, surrounded by opulence and power, she stood firm, a quiet presence of integrity that could not be shaken by words or suspicion. Slowly, details began to emerge. Discrepancies in the family's own records became apparent. Statements from previous meetings, once dismissed, now revealed patterns of manipulation and attempts to obscure Naomi's rightful claim. The realization that truth was starting to pierce through the web of lies gave her a quiet confidence, though the tension in the room remained almost unbearable. Victoria sensed the shift, her sharp words faltering as small cracks appeared in her assertions. Other relatives exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering hurriedly, trying to maintain control over a situation that was no longer easily steered. Despite the rising intensity, Naomi stayed calm, answering questions with patience and letting the facts, one by one, dismantle the arguments leveled against her. The hours were on, each moment a test of endurance, resilience, and composure. Naomi's heart still raced at times, the pressure immense, but she refused to yield to panic or despair. She knew that in this crucible, her strength was in remaining steadfast, in letting the truth unfold without distraction or fear. The scrutiny was exhausting. Guests and staff watched silently as the room became a battlefield of legality, social pressure, and long-held assumptions. Naomi's presence, her calm insistence on truth, slowly began to command attention in a way that Victoria's anger could not. Each piece of evidence she presented chipped away at the structure of disbelief, exposing the cracks in the family's attempts to deny her right. By late afternoon, the room had shifted subtly. The air remained thick with tension, but the certainty of Naomi's legitimacy was beginning to shine through. Victoria, realizing the cracks, attempted a few last verbal assaults, questioning Naomi's character and intentions, but her voice sounded more desperate than convincing. Naomi, steadfast, continued to respond with clarity and patience. The battle for acceptance, for recognition, for justice, was not over, but she had held her ground, weathered the storms of accusation, prejudice, and disbelief, and allowed the truth to speak for itself. In those long hours, it became evident that Naomi's challenge was not just legal or financial. It was a confrontation with ingrained assumptions, social hierarchy, and the silent weight of bias that had long overshadowed fairness. Yet, she remained a figure of quiet resilience, unwavering in the face of relentless opposition, letting the logic, evidence, and undeniable truth grow stronger with every passing moment. The act closes with Naomi standing in the center of the room, documents in hand, tension thick in the air, accusations still lingering, whispers and side glances continuing, but a subtle, unspoken shift having begun, a hint that patience, truth, and perseverance may be stronger than anger, prejudice, or fear, leaving the audience on edge, waiting to see whether justice will finally prevail in the next act. The room was silent, heavy with anticipation, as the final review of documents began. Naomi's patience and perseverance had brought her to this moment, and the air was thick with the tension of revelation. The lawyer appointed to examine the inheritance papers studied each line, each signature, each notation with careful attention, and slowly, the truth began to emerge. Naomi had prepared meticulously, and now her preparation paid off. The discrepancies in the family's previous claims, the attempts to obscure her rightful position, all became visible under scrutiny. Victoria's confident posture faltered as the facts unfolded, her words of accusation losing their power as the evidence of Naomi's rightful claim became undeniable. The whispers of the onlookers grew louder, curiosity and disbelief mixing as they realized that the young woman they had doubted and questioned was indeed the legitimate heir. Naomi remained calm, her voice steady as she answered final questions, providing clarity and insight where needed, letting the documents speak as loudly as her resolve. Every accusation that had been thrown at her, every sneer, every doubt cast in her direction, was being erased by the undeniable truth. And as the lawyer concluded his careful review, he looked directly at Victoria and the rest of the family. "It is clear from these records," he said, "that Naomi is the rightful heir. The inheritance was intended for her, and no claim against her can be substantiated." A hush fell over the room. The room that had been filled with suspicion, whispers, and judgment now held a different weight, the weight of justice recognized, of truth affirmed. Naomi allowed herself a quiet breath, a moment of relief, though she remained composed. The family, stunned into silence, could no longer dispute what was clear. Victoria's face paled, her carefully constructed arguments and attempts at intimidation undone in the span of a few decisive statements. Naomi understood that her victory was not just the inheritance itself, but the vindication of her dignity, the triumph of patience, preparation, and integrity over prejudice and hostility. She had faced relentless questioning, had endured the silent judgments and open accusations of those who believed wealth and power could overshadow fairness, and yet she had stood firm, letting facts, law, and truth guide her path. Slowly, Naomi allowed herself a quiet internal acknowledgement of what she had achieved. Not only had she claimed her rightful inheritance, but she had done so without surrendering to anger or resentment, without letting the venom of others taint her own character. The room, once filled with tension and hostility, now seemed to hold a quiet respect, though unspoken, in the acknowledgement that Naomi had prevailed through steadfastness and truth. Victoria and the others, though unwilling to openly admit defeat, could no longer maintain the illusion of superiority or control. Naomi's rightful place was recognized, and it was evident that nothing could take that from her. She felt a sense of calm strength, a quiet pride that came from standing firm in the face of adversity, and having patience and integrity validated. In those long hours, as tension shifted to recognition and disbelief turned to understanding, Naomi realized that her journey was not only about inheritance or wealth, but about asserting the value of truth, resilience, and dignity in a world that often seeks to undermine both. And as the final acknowledgement was made, as the documents were handed to her and the room absorbed the reality of her victory, Naomi allowed herself a moment to breathe, to reflect on the endurance, courage, and steadfastness that had carried her through. She had faced prejudice, doubt, and hostility, and yet she remained composed, proving that strength is not in the loudness of one's voice, but in the calm confidence of truth. As she looked around the room, she understood that her victory had a greater significance. It was a lesson in integrity, patience, and self-respect for everyone present. Those who had doubted her, who had whispered behind their hands, who had sought to undermine her claim, had witnessed the quiet power of truth and the dignity of one who refuses to be diminished by injustice. And Naomi, standing in the acknowledgement of her rightful place, realized that wealth and status could be taken or contested, but integrity, calm strength, and self-respect were unassailable. This was a moment not of triumph over others, but of affirmation of self, of justice recognized, and of the power of remaining true when the world doubts you. Her journey through accusation, prejudice, and relentless scrutiny had forged a quiet resilience, a deep understanding that patience and steadfastness could overcome even the loudest opposition. Naomi now held in her hands not only the inheritance she had rightfully earned, but the knowledge that she had maintained her dignity and composure when it mattered most. And as the room gradually returned to a more ordinary rhythm, as the whispers subsided and the family retreated to reconcile with reality, Naomi felt a calm sense of completion. Her journey through doubt, hostility, and unfairness had reached its rightful resolution. And to our viewers watching this story unfold, remember that strength is measured not by wealth or power, but by patience, integrity, and the ability to stand firm in the face of adversity. If you were moved by Naomi's journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like so you can follow more stories of courage, resilience, and truth that inspire and remind us of the power of standing strong no matter the odds.